Welcome to the Making of Me podcast, where we explore the experience, decision that have shaped who we have become. Our today guest is Savio Peter Clemente, healthcare leadership strategy, keynote speaker, and resilient coach who help leaders make clear, confident decisions under pressure, drawing from his experience of surviving cancer twice and interviewing over 2,000 experts. Savio has developed framework that help high performance regain clarity, reduce our cognitive fatigue, and lead effectively in high-stake environments. It's really a pleasure and honor to have you on the show.
Aro, thank you so much for the intro. Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Savio, take us back to your journey. What experience first shaped how you think about leadership and pressure?
I would say it's probably my first cancer bout. So you mentioned I'm a two-time cancer survivor. I was first diagnosed in 2014 with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 3. I was cancer-free for a decade, and then I had a relapse in June of 2024, and I went through 16 months of treatment, including chemo, a stem cell transplant, and also immunotherapy. I was in the hospital for 29 days. I lost 26 pounds. And one night, because of tachycardia, because of high pulse, my heartbeat went to 170. They had to put me in ICU and had to give me norepinephrine. Fortunately, through all that, I got my scans and my blood work, and I received a complete response. It's called CR to treatment. So I'm considered cancer-free at the moment.
Amazing. This is really lovely, and I'm really glad to hear this. Yeah. So you have survived cancer twice. How did this experience change your perspective about life and decision making?
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that I'm a keynote speaker, I'm a TEDx speaker, I'm an executive coach. And for me, when I work with these leaders, especially healthcare leadership, is that most focus on surviving the crisis. For me, the crisis was medical. But the real challenge comes after the crisis when that old operating system of ours no longer works, but we have to perform, like performance is required. So I study the phase after interviewing over 2,000 leaders, thought leaders, experts, change makers, and even celebrities about what do you do after the disruption, after adversity comes into your life, what do you do? And most leaders are trained to survive the crisis, but very few are prepared to lead after it. And so I study that crisis. What happens after and how do you regain composure? So for me, what life has taught me was that beyond being present and beyond, which is really big for all of us, we're all thinking about what's happening in the future rather than what's happening now, is really this idea that beyond presence, we also have to be authentic within ourselves. And the only way to do that is to figure out what's happening within us. Because the only way, when we do that, what we do mirrors another. We reflect to others what that is. And what's leadership? Leadership is people following you, people seeing and wanting to emulate you, people wanting to be a part of your story. And so the key is to first figure out for yourself, what are you giving out to the world? And the only way to do that is to figure out what's happening inside. So I have frameworks, I have things that we can discuss, but that's where I start off.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thanks for sharing. So in those moments of crisis, how did you learn about yourself that you think you didn't know before?
So you can imagine the first time in 2014, I was in the hospital for 15 days. Of those 15 days, the first 8 days was strapped to a hospital bed because they had to put a nephrostomy tube in me because I had, my stomach was getting bigger and bigger, and they had to distill about 8 liters of fluid from my abdomen. 10 years later, in 2024, I was in the hospital for 29 days. And in those 29 days, they gave me a quarantine room because when you get a stem cell transplant, they have to make sure there's no infections. So in that era, I had two things. I had silence and I had stillness. And all the great religions will teach you about the silence and the stillness. And it's the only thing I had. I couldn't rely on anything else. And in that, what I realized about myself was that I am much greater than my pain. I am much greater than my discomfort. I'm much greater than my cancer.
I'm much greater than my pain, than my cancer. Really amazing and really reassuring way of looking at pain and looking into his eyes and say, I'm greater than everything that actually might come into me. Yeah, amazing. So how did those experiences influence your approach to leadership and resilience?
Yes. So a lot of us know what resilience is. I'm to some degree a poster child of that.
Yeah.
But resilience is not just about bouncing back.
Mm.
Resilience, what I know, is about adaptive resilience, which is what my framework is called, adaptive resilience leadership framework. And that basically posits that when you're in the mess, when you're in the pain, when you're in the confusion, when you're in the sorrow, when you're in the fear, how can you remain flexible? How can you be curious? How can you learn? How can you adapt? What strategies can you use? What can you pull? What can you gain? I'll give you an example. I was in the hospital, like I said, 29 days. Every 4 hours, they would come to take my vitals. I would look at my vitals because it would be in the My Chart, the notification. And if something was wrong, I would use my AI and on my phone, and I would ask questions. I would say, what about these? And then when my care team came and they would do their rounds every morning, I would get up, even though I was tired and not feeling great. You know, for 1 week, I didn't eat anything. I had no desire to eat food. I kept going to the bathroom, like up and down. I got up, and every day that they came, and I said, okay, you and I are working together in a partnership. I said, I'm hearing from the nurses, because I would talk to the nurses. And I said, a lot of people who do stem cell transplants want to leave. They want to go home. But a lot of them then come back because they have an infection or something else goes wrong. I said, you don't have to discharge me. Only discharge me if I need to go home. I'm not in any rush to go home because I didn't want to come back. And so my whole point in telling you is that people often say the doctors will fix me. No, it's a partnership. You have to give and they have to take, and you have to work together because you need the medicines, you need the care, but you also have your spirit, you have your mind, you have your emotion, you have your heart, you have all the things that you want to get accomplished. So the first key is to figure out for yourself what's important in the moment, and then also to surrender. Like a lot of people think, oh, chemo, and yes, chemo is horrible. I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, it takes away your hair. Now I wear it like a badge of courage.
Yeah.
You know, chemo, there's side effects, and, chemo does this and chemo does that, and chemo is poison and all. And yes, all of those are true. But chemo is also designed to heal you. So you have to accept the medicine. You have to surrender to the medicine. And you have to look at it like an elixir. That's what I did. Instead of thinking of it as a poison, I looked at it as an elixir. If you believe in the Bible and you believe in things that were written there, they talk about something called manna, grace from heaven.
Yeah.
So I looked at it like manna.
Such a lovely way of reframing. Yeah, something that ought to be painful, something that ought to be more like very well, like people looking at it saying it's painful, is this and that, and you just reframe it to, which it's manner. I think it really changed your whole of perspective. And instead of anxiety taking hold of you, worries and everything, now we are now actually more like filled with more curious and happiness, and the fact that being that you have renamed it, and really amazing. And thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. So you talk about leadership struggling, even after crisis is over. What does that look like in real time?
So my framework really designs and focuses on everyone ignores the stress signals and they're not aware. So they don't take actionable clarity or to turn what the alchemists back in the day, they would try to turn lead into gold. And so it's turning the pain of lead into gold, which is wisdom. So it's really about being comfortable and having clarity when the pressure is not optional. And really that determines whether they're stagnating or that they're making breakthrough. So oftentimes people just ignore the subtle signals, which then leads to cognitive fatigue, cognitive load, where it's so much that's happening, extreme amounts of pressure, poor decision making. And so the high performers that I work with just don't survive disruption. They convert it into strategic advantage.
Amazing, amazing. I think what you just pulled out from the alchemist is really lovely. Converting your lead into gold. And despite what you need initially is not actually lead, but the fact that everything could actually more like walk towards our same purpose you're actually looking forward to. If only you could actually more like reframe how things is, and resilience coming into place, and you being able to kind of cooperate with the inevitable to bring it towards the success that you desire. It's really amazing. Yeah. So why do you think many high performers find it difficult to regain clarity after disruption?
Well, I think a few things. One is they're caught up in identity. Who are they in front of their team? Who are they in front of their boss? Who are they in front of the organization? Then another thing is that they put that extra pressure, extra load on them. But there's tools to combat this. So the first one is self-regulation. How am I going to regulate myself? What am I going to do? For some people, that's meditating every day. Some people, that's prayer every day. Some people, that's breathing exercises every day. Some people, it's fitness every day. Some people, it's walking every day. What are you going to do to regulate those things? And also with that, don't be obsessed, but know your metrics. Know what your heart rate is, know what your pulse is, like know these things, like know what steps you're taking if that's something that you want to count. So that's number one. The second thing is really, they don't give themselves, like I mentioned earlier, that silence or that stillness, that reflection time. Because if you don't know yourself or know what's prompting you, you're just going to react. So you're going to be reactive instead of responsive. You don't want to react to someone, you want to respond to someone. So take that pause and take that breath. And then also a few other things like psychological distancing. Have that distance between you and the problem so that you can actually adequately understand, is it a mental or an emotional thing that you need to wrestle with? And then with that, Aro, we've been told a long time ago that intellect was the number one thing that we need, right? And then we were told, no, emotional, intellectual. That's what we need to be. Now the science and the research shows it's actually something called metacognition, which is the thinking of the thinking. So having that distance and thinking of the thinking. And that's the hard part, because that's a journey that never ends. Yeah. But you can find that through those means that I mentioned: meditation, prayer, silence, stillness. That's a way to cultivate that. And then, like I said, again, about this idea of adaptive resilience, how are you going to be flexible and create strategies when you're in the situation? For example, for me, I was in life and death situation. So for me, that's extreme. But for other people, it doesn't have to be so extreme. But when you're in the pain, how are you going to wrestle with it? How are you going to be curious with it and not judge the situation, but try to understand the situation?
Yeah, amazing. I think this is really lovely, especially when you just make reference of this. And I remember when I was reading this particular book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. It make reference of cooperating with the inevitable and knowing that, this is what the outcome is, and the fact that even by struggling or by kind of doing anything you can kind of do, you can't change what is currently present. So now it's you working out from, what can I do different to make things better? What can I do differently to make it easier on the doctors, for those who are actually more like taking care of me, and to make it easier for those who are the caregiver too, so that in a way they won't be discouraged on the possibility of the outcome turning very well. And this is really amazing, being that, knowing what more like the inevitable is, cooperating with it, and doing the much as possible to actually more like turn this around. And I think this really speaks volumes to resilience, being that most times intellectual cannot actually take in that far in terms of academic and everything and IQ, compared to willing to actually go through the whole lot of those pain and keep showing up with a larger part of energy towards things becoming better, having that particular hope, having that particular lovely perspective. And it's really amazing. And amazing. Thanks for sharing.
Because one of the things when people say to me, well, how do I make it simple? Well, in my adaptive resilience framework leadership, I actually talk about something called the ALOHA reboot. And I mentioned it in my TEDx talk. So I did a TEDx talk about 3 years prior to when I had the relapse. And in it, it's a very simple framework within the framework. And it's an acronym. As we know, ALOHA, the word in Hawaiian, means hello. So it just means hello to your inner self. And when I start my TEDx talk, I ask a simple question, Aro. I said, when you look at yourself in the mirror, do you see what's reflected back in you? And they're like, what? Because my TEDx talk is called 7 Minutes to Wellness, How to Love Your Inner Stranger. And people are like, stranger? What's inner stranger? They're like, what's that mean? And I'm like, I made that vague on purpose. But I said, for me, inner stranger is that young person who never felt grounded. I never felt completely rooted in my situation. I always felt like I never belonged. And then the one of the females was like, oh, actually, my inner stranger is that female that wants to be that perfect professional working lady, or that perfect mother, or that perfect sibling, and I cannot be that perfect person. That's my inner stranger. And so the acronym is very simple. It's A stands for acknowledge. Acknowledge where you are. Don't pretend. Don't just write it all down, and acknowledge where you are. Tell the truth and be authentic. L stands for listening. So listen to your inner self. Now, in Hawaiian, there's a healing modality called Huna healing. And in Huna healing, they talk about talking to your body, talking to your head, heart, and gut. Now, I don't expect people to do this
Yeah.
with somebody else because it looks a little strange.
Yeah.
But they say that the body, the head, heart, and gut especially, gives off sensations, vibrations. It gives off some information if we just are quiet and still enough to listen to that information. So that's L for listening. O is for opening. So open yourself up to this information. Don't be afraid. No matter what your belief system is, you're just exploring yourself. So don't be afraid of that. H stands for harnessing. So harness all this information, write it all down, try to make connections with it. And A stands for acting. But with acting, you have to have courage. So have the courage to act. Don't be afraid to make the changes necessary. Because at the end of the day, Aro, think of it like a pot. If you have a pot full of water, you cannot fill new water inside. You have to let go and release the old contents in order to put new, fresh waters in.
Yeah, amazing. Aloha. Acknowledge, listening, opening, harness, and act it out. Oh, this is really amazing framework. Looking back, what has your journey taught you about strength, clarity, and control?
Few things come up. This idea of emotional harmony within ourselves, self-awareness, this idea of decision speed. These are all things, they're all topics that I speak of, when I do my keynotes on stage. And really it's, in my lane of healthcare leadership, we always talk about things like, strategic reversals, something that was widely adopted, but now it's no longer the standard of care. We talk about this idea of accelerate post-crisis momentum, like COVID gave us all these innovations, but then they didn't really fizzle, they didn't really meet the standards that were necessary. Improving return on investment, ROI, or increasing ramp, this idea of recovery plus patient delays. And so this idea of disruption and obstacles is really all a theme in general about your life not going the way you expected it to go, whether that's professionally or personally. And I think the answer to all of them is to constantly reassess and to figure out for yourself, how can you make those things in alignment with one another? Because it's really easy to get off course, but it's really hard to come back into alignment. So just be really truthful and honest with yourself. Use some of these tools, frameworks that I mentioned, and then you can actually have a better understanding as to what's motivating you. Because I think to a large degree, some of us are motivated by compulsion and motivated by our peers and motivated by society and now motivated by social media. And some of us, Aro, are motivated by artificial intelligence now. So there's so many people and things telling us what to do rather than listening to our wisdom within us to figure out the next steps.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. This has really been amazing. And I'm just looking at the framework again. Yeah, acknowledge what is going on. Yeah, listening to everything that's going on. Yeah, be open to different ideas. Harness it, yes, and then act it out. Yeah, it's really amazing. So for my audience who love to kind of dive deeper to actually more like reach out for your coaching sections or for the service you offer or to read more about you, how can they reach out to you and which platform perfectly do justice to this?
Sure. So before I give that, I just want people to understand that whatever the cognitive load or your desire to gain clarity and composure, sometimes it's hard to do it on our own, and sometimes we need help to do it. So whether that's through keynotes or through coaching or through my journalism, they can follow me on my website, Savio, Savio, P for Peter, P Clemente, Clemente. On there, you can see my keynote work. You can also see my TEDx talk. Also, weekly, every Wednesday, I have a Substack newsletter called The Human Resolve, because the resolve is all we have. And in there, I talk about head, heart, and gut intelligence and what we need to do in order to remain alive and remain focused and remain sort of have clarity that we don't really have, and really up the decision speed, because I think for a large degree we always feel like we have to react rather than respond. And then they can follow me on social media at The Human Resolve. I'm on every platform.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure having you on the show. And for my audience, definitely who would love to kind of follow Savio with his work and the coaches section, yeah, check on the show notes. You get to see the link. Yeah, Savio, thank you so much. Your story just sits at the intersection of survivor, leadership, and clarity. The journey shows that true leadership is not just about performing under pressure, but learning how to think clearly, decide wisely, and live effectively even after life has already changed you. Yeah, it's really amazing, and it's really a pleasure and honor having you on the show.
Thank you, Aro. I really appreciate it.